Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News broadcasting live from the Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Israel says it's approved a plan to capture all of the Gaza Strip and expand its military offensive against Hamas. President Trump announces 100% tariffs on foreign-made movies to save Hollywood. And the British royal family join World War II veterans in London to mark 80 years since Victory in Europe Day. To our top story, Israel's Security Cabinet has approved a plan to expand its military offensive against Hamas and capture all of the Gaza Strip. The plan also included distributing aid through private companies, which would end a 2-month blockade on Gaza, something that the UN says has caused severe food shortages. We can now go live to Paris to speak to Ahmed Benchemsi, who is the Communications Director for Human Rights Watch's Middle East and North Africa Division. Thank you so much for joining me. Great to have you on the show. First of all, can you give us the latest on the humanitarian crisis in Gaza right now?
Well, it's simple. I'm going to quote the UN. The UN has warned that Gaza is currently facing its worst humanitarian crisis since the beginning of hostilities. We're talking about October 7 here. So the blockade that has been renewed by the Israeli government since March the 2nd, which is about 60 days, has completely stopped the entry of any humanitarian aid. This is a flagrant violation of international law. In terms of food, in terms of access to healthcare, I mean, all essentials are stopped. Like the World Food Program, 5 days ago reported, or 10 days ago, reported that its food stocks have been depleted. Bakeries and community kitchens have either shut down or will very soon do so. And community kitchens are the last remaining lifeline in the Strip, in the Gaza Strip. The risk of hunger, of malnutrition, and of famine is growing. As for the healthcare system, it is on the brink of collapse. It is overwhelmed by mass casualties. The very little infrastructure that remains is critically hindered by the full blockade. There is a cutoff of essential life-saving medicines, vaccines, medical equipment. I wouldn't even know where to start.
Humanitarian agencies are saying it's a catastrophe that's only getting worse, as you've basically outlined to me. Ahmed, what needs to happen to begin helping these people in Gaza right now?
Well, clearly Israel has to lift its blockade, which again is unlawful. It is a flagrant violation of international law. It is not a legitimate military tactic. So first and foremost, Israel has to lift its blockade. And then it has to restore water and electricity access and allow in desperately needed help. Water, food, medical aid, fuel. That's what needs to happen. It's in the hands of Israel, and it needs to abide by international law at last.
In what's been described as his dying wish, one of Pope Francis's Pope-mobiles will be turned into a mobile health clinic to help children in Gaza. What are your thoughts on this from the late Pontiff?
Well, it's certainly a beautiful gesture that is to be commended, and it's a symbolic gesture with that. But now, I mean, let's even imagine this Pope Mobile is available now and ready to function. It wouldn't get inside Gaza because of the blockade. So Israel, again, needs to lift the blockade for all humanitarian aid, including this beautiful symbolic gesture, but everything else that is needed. We're talking about a population of about 2 million people who are, on the brink of famine and needing every basic humanitarian supplies. So borders need to open for that.
Ahmed, what kind of supplies are waiting at the borders? Is there enough in case this blockade is lifted to help the people in Gaza?
Well, we'll have to review the numbers, but let's open the borders first. I mean, there is certainly a long lineup of trucks and material and medical supplies and food and water that is waiting patiently to get in. So, like, the first thing is to open the doors, and then we can start assessing if it's enough. And I'm pretty sure the international community will be very happy and ready to send more, even as the borders are open. Let me remind you that France and UK UK and Australia and other countries have called Israel to immediately restart a rapid and unimpeded flow of humanitarian aid to Gaza. I'm quoting them. Even President Trump has reportedly pressed Prime Minister Netanyahu to allow food and medicine. So everybody's pressing Israel to do that, not as a favor to the Palestinian people, but as a basic way to abide by its obligations under international law.
Ahmed Benchemsi, great to have you on the show. Thank you very much for your thoughts.
Thanks for having me.
For more on this, I'm joined by former Israeli government spokesperson Eylon Levy. Eylon, great to have you on the show. Firstly, I just want to know if you want to react. We just literally heard from our first guest there about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Is this blockade going to be lifted? People are desperate.
It is important that aid reach the people who need it, but not if Hamas can steal it. And that's the problem we're dealing with now. The humanitarian aid has been Hamas's main financial pipeline. That is how Hamas is surviving. Recently, it hasn't been able to pay its soldiers because it hasn't been able to tax the goods. Israel, let's be clear, under international law, is not required to facilitate supplies into Gaza that an enemy military is hijacking in order to finance its war machine. And anyone who seriously cares about the humanitarian situation in Gaza needs to be clear that this war has to end with the immediate release of the hostages and Hamas stepping down from power, because a jihadi regime remaining in power in Gaza is bad for us in Israel and also bad for the Palestinians.
Eylon, Netanyahu has so far failed to achieve his goal of destroying Hamas or of returning all of the hostages. He says Israel's plan to capture all of the Gaza Strip will be intensive. How will this new military strategy be carried out?
Well, the strategy has changed. For the last year and a half, Israel was playing a game of cat and mouse with Hamas. It sent soldiers into Gaza, they cleared an area of Hamas, and then withdrew, and Hamas came back. And it should be clear to everyone, that's no way to permanently remove Hamas from power. So the new Israeli military strategy says, this war has gone on for too long, it must end, and it must end with Hamas's defeat. So Israel will send in the military, fight Hamas, and then hold territory so Hamas cannot recapture it. And when Israel is able to capture the entire territory and remove Hamas from power, then we can start to talk about a day after plan once the regime that perpetrated the October 7th massacre and is still holding 24 hostages who are still alive is removed from power. Then we can move on.
Eylon, surveys have shown dwindling public support for the war among Israelis. And we also saw 1,200 Israeli pilots have signed an open letter arguing the war served mainly political and personal interests and not security ones. Do you agree with this assessment? Is this for political gain?
There is a lot of frustration in Israel at how long this war has been going on, and everyone in Israel is paying a terrible price. Let's remember, we still have rocket sirens every single day. But everyone in Israel agrees that this war has to end with Hamas removed from power and the hostages returned. No one wants to give up on the hostages who are being starved and tortured and executed by Hamas. And no one in Israel thinks we can live next to the Hamas jihadi regime, because Hamas's reason for existing is to wage forever jihad until Israel is destroyed. And if Israel leaves the October 7th war machine in power, it's only a matter of time until the next October 7th massacre happens. So there is a lot of disagreement in Israel about how we should achieve those goals, but there is broad unity in the country that we have to achieve them. We have to bring the hostages home, and we have to get people back to the homes they were forced to flee on October 7th. And the only way they can do that is if the Hamas terrorist regime is no longer their neighbor.
So, Eylon, you say there that there is these growing divisions within Israel, and renewed fighting hasn't forced Hamas to surrender, and they have described the plan as a tool of political blackmail. That is what Hamas is saying. What is your response to them?
Israel wants Hamas to surrender, and let's remember, this war can end tomorrow if Hamas surrenders and releases the hostages. This war could have ended on October 8, 2023, if Hamas had surrendered and released the hostages. And Hamas refuses to end the war because it wants to end this war in power, free to continue terrorizing Israelis and free to continue oppressing the people of Gaza. I don't know if you've covered the horrific executions of dissidents inside Gaza who are bravely standing up and saying Hamas bara bara, Hamas out out. So there is disagreement within Israel about how those goals should be achieved. But everyone understands Hamas has to go. There is no way that the Hamas regime remains in power and we move forward to a future of peace. Hamas has to go.
Eylon, what's Israel's plan for Gaza's future?
Well, the day after means the day after Hamas. And just like the Marshall Plan, which rebuilt Europe after the Second World War, wasn't devised for years until after the defeat of Nazi Germany, first Hamas has to be removed from power. Israel would like to see the moderate Arab states in the region take responsibility for governing Gaza, because there's a lot of work to do. First of all, de-radicalization. The only way we're going to have sustainable peace is if the people of Gaza, who celebrated on the streets when the October 7th massacre happened, are de-radicalized and disavow Hamas's path of jihad. And there, I think Saudi Arabia and the UAE, which have their own experience with de-radicalization, have a very important role to play in regional stability. But they need to decide they want to play it.
Former Israeli government spokesman Eylon Levy, thank you so much for joining me.
Glad to join you as always.
President Donald Trump has announced there will be 100% tariffs on all movies produced in foreign lands. He made the announcement on Truth Social, that was last night. He said the US film industry was dying a very fast death due to the incentives that other countries were offering to draw in American filmmakers. He also added this is a concerted effort by other nations and therefore a national security threat. For more on this, I'm joined by Arabiya senior correspondent and presenter Carina Kamel. Carina, always great to have you on the show. Netflix and Disney shares slipped on Trump's tariff plan for foreign films. Have we seen any other market reaction at all today?
The main market reaction has been indeed on the shares of some of the large film production companies. Notably, the streamers seem to have been hit the hardest. Netflix down more than 2%, Amazon, but also Paramount Global has been down. And perhaps the announcement today from Donald Trump, or yesterday rather, has raised more questions than it has answered, and it's indeed raised concerns that production costs could increase, especially for the streamers. Perhaps they're more exposed to, shall we say, the global supply chain in the filmmaking industry. So if we look at the reaction in shares such as Netflix and Amazon, perhaps more pronounced than some of the other companies that we've seen, some of the big studio companies like Disney, for example, that have more of a kind of venue towards theatrical releases as well. There's so many questions here that are unclear. For example, these tariffs, if we talk about the complications in the auto industry, for example, and the complicated supply chains, it's perhaps even more complicated in the global film production industry. Are these tariffs going to hit the cost of production? Are they going to be a percentage of the cost of production, or are they going to be a percentage of the box office revenues that the movies make? Will they be directed at streamers or at companies that are able to produce theatrical releases? So it's generally unclear, but interesting. The latest to come out of the White House is that after the announcement from Donald Trump, the White House is now saying no decisions have actually been made. What we do know, though, is that Donald Trump in January appointed 3 Hollywood actors, Sylvester Stallone, Mel Gibson and Jon Voight, as sort of, shall we say, movie czars, with the sole purpose of bringing the industry back stronger and bigger and better.
So, Carina, another actor, Ben Affleck, has said movies aren't made in Hollywood anymore. Are there better incentives to make films out of the US and also out of Hollywood itself?
Absolutely. And it's really interesting that Donald Trump has chosen tariffs as his preferred tool for reviving the U.S. film production industry. there is no doubt the U.S. film production industry has suffered greatly over the past few years. There's been a series of setbacks, shall we say. Obviously, the COVID period, and there was a massive shutdown of film production globally, but it was very pronounced in California. We remember that the lockdown rules were very strict in California, especially compared to other parts of the United States. So it was a big hit from COVID during that period of time. That was also followed by a series of strikes by the actors, but also by the writers. So there was a very prolonged period where production was not at the normal level. So that's one of the main factors why the industry has perhaps lagged behind other parts of the world, shall we say the movie industry in the United States. The sort of, if we think about the other factors, the external factors and how other countries are behaving, to answer your question, countries like the United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand have indeed been reviving their own industries or perhaps attracting investment to their own industries through tax incentives. And the UK has been particularly successful in this area. So here in the United Kingdom, successive governments, Conservative and Labour, have been cutting costs, slashing taxes, providing a number of incentives, and they have resulted, these measures, in companies coming to the UK and choosing to film their movies here and also do the post-production on their films here, the visual effects. We've got Pinewood Studios. The Star Wars franchise has been filmed in the United Kingdom. A number of others, some of the Marvel films have been filmed here. We know Australia and New Zealand are very popular destinations, and the industries have grown massively over the past few years in Australia and New Zealand due to those incentives offered by those governments. So one way to attract, shall we say, movie making back to the United States would be a tax cut or some kind of tax incentive, some kind of a subsidy perhaps, some kind of easing of regulation. But Donald Trump has perhaps resorted or turned to his favorite tool, which is tariffs rather.
And let's just move on to another subject. Warren Buffett is stepping down as the chief executive of Berkshire Hathaway at the end of this year. He is 94 and a complete legend. Tell us why he is in the financial world.
He is a total legend. That is a very good way to describe him. The Oracle of Omaha, the company that was based in Omaha, Nebraska at age 94. After running and overseeing the company for 60 years, Berkshire Hathaway, one of the most influential investors in the history of Wall Street, has surprised investors on Saturday and announced that he would be stepping down as CEO of the company. He has a very clear succession plan in place. Greg Abel, who is the vice chair at the moment, will take over as CEO next year. Warren Buffett will stay on, by the way, as chairman, so he's not leaving completely, but perhaps he's handing over the reins of day-to-day management to Greg Abel. Now, this is a company, this is a conglomerate valued at $1.1 trillion US dollars. It operates 189 businesses, and it has a cash stockpile of 350 almost billion US dollars, in addition to about 260 billion in stock. So when Warren Buffett speaks, the market listens. And I think that's why we're talking about this move as an end of an era truly in Wall Street. And the interesting thing also, in addition to the company's very successful history, if we look at the return on investment, the annualized return for investors who hold Berkshire Hathaway stock, that's the company owned by Warren Buffett, has been about double the return on the average return on companies listed on the S&P market, so much higher than the average market return. The other really interesting thing about Berkshire Hathaway is that it's generally invested in traditional companies. What does it own? It owns railroad, it owns car insurance companies, utilities, power companies, and Warren Buffett always said he only invests in companies that he can understand, or he understands how they operate, which is why we've seen him invest perhaps more heavily in some of the more traditional industries that we've seen, and less so in some of the new media and the tech and the AI-driven investments. The other thing that really distinguished him from some of the investors we've seen in the market lately is that he invests to hold, and to hold for the long term. And investors really do follow his moves. So a simple disclosure by Buffett himself or by the company saying that it perhaps increased its stockpile of a certain company or its share holding, or turned to buy stocks in a certain company, would be enough to drive up the stock of that company. So the question now remains, Greg Abel, the person who's going to take over, by the way, the board unanimously voted in favor of appointing him. So clearly there's some strong backing for him there. The question is, will he continue to steer the company in that same direction, or will he want to come and put his personal imprint on it and perhaps send it in another direction? And some people are comparing this shift to when Steve Jobs stepped down from Apple in 2001 and handed the reins, or 2011 rather, and handed the reins to Tim Cook.
End of an era for sure. Al Arabiya senior correspondent and presenter Carina Kamel, always great to have you on. Thank you. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. Donald Trump has said he's had a productive call with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan today. They reportedly spoke about the war in Ukraine and issues involving Syria and Gaza. Trump said the Turkish leader will be coming to Washington, and Erdogan invited him to visit Turkey. Now, the estranged husband of an Australian woman accused of murdering his parents and aunt will return to stand in her trial today. Erin Patterson is on trial for killing 3 relatives and seriously injuring another by allegedly serving them a lunch containing poisonous mushrooms. The Vatican has announced that all of the 133 Catholic cardinals who will vote to choose a successor to Pope Francis are now in Rome. The conclave will start on Wednesday, when the cardinals will gather in secret in the Sistine Chapel. And Brazilian police say they have thwarted a bomb attack planned for Lady Gaga's concert on Copacabana Beach in Rio de Janeiro on Saturday. Officials said the plot was orchestrated by a group promoting hate speech and the radicalization of teenagers. The trial of one of the most successful rappers and music moguls in the US, Sean Diddy Combs, has started in New York today with jury selection. The charges against him include racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking, and transportation to engage in prostitution. If convicted, he could face life in prison. Combs has pleaded not guilty to the criminal charges. For more on this, I'm joined by correspondent Sara Firth, who is in Washington. Sara, great to have you on the show. Okay, jury selection has now begun, I'm guessing, or soon. What's the timeline for this?
Leigh-Ann, you're right. Jury selection is now underway in New York in this sex trafficking trial of Sean Diddy Combs. Now, the judge is going to be facing the very difficult task of trying to gauge if these jurors that are brought in are able to oversee this case impartially. So this is some of the reporting that we've had already from journalists that are inside the court there in New York that we can bring you. We've heard that the first batch of 50 jurors have been brought in. We've heard that Sean Diddy Combs himself is sat there in the court. He's got a large legal team around him. And these are the questions that are going to be being posed to the jurors. Do they have, for example, any experience of sexual assault in their past? Or is there anything that could perhaps mean that they wouldn't be able to be impartial in this case? Now, of course, very difficult when you have a very high-profile person like Sean Diddy Combs. Now, we already know from reporting inside the court that pretty much every juror has admitted they've seen headlines about the allegations against Sean Combs. Several have said that that would not prevent them being impartial as a juror. Now, this is from reporting from journalists inside the court. One juror, we've been told, has already been excluded because she says she has a family member that has experienced trauma that would not allow her to be impartial. Now, of course, there have been headlines absolutely everywhere around this case that is now underway in New York. We know that the judges are going to be looking, hopefully today, to be hearing from 100 to 150 jurors, to be asking them these sorts of questions to gauge impartiality. But look, a long day in the courtroom ahead, probably a very long week, if not weeks ahead.
Yes, indeed. But Sara, what are the most serious charges Diddy is facing, and how long could he possibly serve if he is convicted?
Yes, let's just recap, viewers, of what we're talking about here, because these charges are extremely serious. You've got this hip-hop mogul who's known across the country and around the world. He faces 1 count of racketeering conspiracy, 2 counts of sex trafficking, 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. Now, important to note that Sean Diddy Combs has denied all the charges against him. He has rejected a plea deal. Now, we know that once the jurors are selected and this trial gets underway and we hear the opening statements and this really kicks off, that there are going to be some pretty grim details that are expected to be released. We already know that this footage, the CCTV hotel footage, that allegedly shows him assaulting his ex-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura, in the hotel, that will be permitted to be used in the trial. Now, we know a few weeks back, Sean Diddy Combs and his legal team were fighting very, very hard for that footage to not be shown to jurors. Of course, again, a lot of people will already have seen that information that is out there on the internet, and that gives you a glimpse, Leigh-Ann, of just what the judges are up against when they're trying to select this usually 12 jurors that are impartial, that are able to view the case and the evidence that will be presented to them over the weeks impartially. Very difficult given the high-profile nature of this case and some of the details that have already been released. If Sean Diddy Combs is found guilty, he could face life in prison, and this all happening right now in New York, the place where his entire career started.
Yes, indeed. And what has Diddy and his lawyers said so far in relation to these charges against him?
Well, we know that, as I said, they fought very, very hard for this video footage that allegedly shows the abuse against his ex-girlfriend, that CCTV footage in a hotel. They worked very hard to try and get that excluded from the trial. It won't be. It will be shown to the jurors, and it's out there for the world to see. We know that, again, important to note that they have denied all of those charges against him, and they have rejected a plea deal. Now, that's a big choice to make, because that plea deal, of course, could have potentially looked to reduce any possible sentence that he would be given. Because of that rejection of a plea deal, Sean Diddy Combs and his legal team are essentially going in with this full denial of those counts of racketeering, of sex trafficking, transportation to engage in prostitution. They've already mentioned in sort of defense that some of these activities that he's been engaged in, they will argue illegal. But these are very, very serious charges indeed. He has denied this plea deal. So again, he's up against it. There are major things at stake here. We'll be hearing evidence from people involved in this. And I think, Leigh-Ann, we talk about this sometimes when you have these high-profile cases. Sean Diddy Combs, he's been described as the hip-hop mogul. Well, in this instance, he'll be judged by these jurors that are selected as a man facing these serious counts with video evidence allegedly showing abuse of women. There'll be very brave women coming forward to give their evidence, and expect very grim details in the weeks ahead. And at the end of that, the jurors will be deciding if he is guilty of these charges that have been brought against him, and whether he will potentially then, because of the rejection of a plea deal, face life in prison for those alleged crimes.
Correspondent Sara Firth, thank you so much for all of that information. Appreciate it. Now, thousands of people in London have joined the royal family to watch events commemorating 80 years since Victory Day in Europe. As part of the commemorations, the King, Queen Camilla, and the Prince and Princess of Wales watched a military parade alongside World War II veterans. For more on this, I'm joined from London by correspondent Ollie Barrett. Ollie, it's been a significant day, pomp and ceremony. It started off with a military parade around London. Tell us more.
Yeah, Leigh-Ann, lots of pomp and ceremony indeed. That military parade through London was one of the centrepieces of this Monday, which is a public holiday in the UK to mark VE Day this time around. That military procession moving from Parliament Square just outside the House of Commons through to Buckingham Palace, where King Charles was there to watch that parade go past and give it his salute. Around 1,300 members of the military were involved in that, but also some from NATO military allies as well. So an international theme to it. And this is really just the start of a series of events that are being held here in the UK across the next few days. Today we've also seen a tea party for veterans at Buckingham Palace. We've seen a street party hosted by Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, at number 10 Downing Street. The British citizens are being encouraged to hold street parties over the coming days as well. As I say, Monday, the first day of 4 days of celebration and marking the events of VE Day 80 years ago. Thursday itself is VE Day, but between now and then, lots of events going on up and down the country.
Actor Timothy Spall also made an appearance. What did he actually do?
He did. He gave the famous Churchill speech, the wartime leader of Britain, Winston Churchill, the speech that he gave on VE Day 80 years ago, which has been so famous ever since. And Timothy Spall knows a bit about giving Churchill speeches because he played Winston Churchill in the film The King's Speech back in 2010. So he's had some practice. He has the cadence in his voice as he delivered the famous Churchill speech from that day. And that was just one of the echoes of what happened in London, but elsewhere in Britain 80 years ago. One of the real differences this time around is that this was the first major marking of VE Day since VE Day itself at the end of the Second World War, in which there was not a member of the royal family taking part in today's commemorations. That was there on that balcony 80 years ago. And the reason for that, of course, is that the Queen Elizabeth II, has died between the 75th and 80th anniversaries of VE Day being marked here. So a poignant reminder of how things change. But there were, as I say, there were veterans taking part in a series of the events, several of them well into their 90s and even over 100 years old now.
Ollie, the royal family's appearance comes after Prince Harry's interview over the weekend. They did say they hoped nothing detracted from VE Day celebrations today and into this week. Have we heard any more at all from Prince Harry?
No, I mean, the words that we got from a Buckingham Palace aide, as you rightly say, did talk about not wanting anything to detract from the events of the day. The aide went on to say, nothing will detract or distract from celebrating with full cheer and proud hearts that precious victory and those brave souls on this most special and poignant of anniversaries. What that was a very clear signal from the palace was that they didn't want the interview that Prince Harry had given last week and all sorts of conversations around it to in any way detract from the events of today and indeed the events of the next few days. And the palace aide goes on to say that the King and the Queen are going to be celebrating, commemorating and giving thanks to the wartime generation that must never be forgotten. Clearly the timing of that interview by Prince Harry towards the end of last week, coming just before these major days of commemorations here in the UK, was an awkward one for the palace, and they felt it necessary just to get those words out there off the back of that interview that Harry gave last week.
Ollie Barrett, just quickly, will you be going to a street party? I love a street party in London.
I'll be trying my best to get to a street party, although I haven't got long left because I'm off to Rome in the morning and for the conclave. So I'm running out of time, put it that way.
Oh, Ollie, well, have a really safe flight to Rome. Great to have you on, our correspondent there, Ollie Barrett. Thank you very much. A reminder of our top stories. Israel says it's approved a plan to capture all of the Gaza Strip and expand its military offensive against Hamas. President Trump announces 100% tariffs on foreign-made movies to save Hollywood. The British royal family joins crowds and World War II veterans in London to mark 80 years since a victory in Europe Day. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also follow us on X. The Rail deal is coming up next, followed by Counterpoints with Melinda New Sephora. Plus, of course, we'll be back in a couple of hours with a W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you for joining us.